Welcome to Better Relationships, Better Life, where relationships expert Judy K. Herman and her guests share insights that can help you move through conflicts in your 9-to-5 jobs and your 24/7 lives. Crack the clarity code and create deeper connections beyond the messiness of relationships. Here's your host, Judy K. Herman.
If your marriage doesn't feel quite right, you'll want to tune into this episode. Natalie Hoffman has been there and courageously gives us clarity about covert abuse. Any kind of abuse is not only a global issue, but her ministry is to women of faith, especially Christian women who have homeschooled their children, many caught up in a belief system that grooms them to accept a toxic view of themselves and their relationships. Let's listen in to Exposing Emotional Abuse, How to Break Free from Marital Confusion. Natalie, I am so glad you are here. I want folks to know that you are the author and host of the Flying Free podcast. You're a speaker and a coach for women of faith in emotionally and spiritually abusive marriages. And I would absolutely love for you to just tell our listeners more about what you do. It's so cool that we met. I don't know, was it a couple years ago that I was actually on your podcast?
If time goes by so fast, it's hard to remember when specific things happen. But yeah, I feel like I've known you for a while. So,
you're one of those people, Natalie, I'll tell you, that you meet you for the first time. It's kind of like you're one of those people that you feel like you've known each other for a long time. And I think because there are so many things about your story, even though my story is different, but there's a whole lot of similarities and dynamics that I certainly resonated with on so many levels. But we were talking before. I just want to tell our listeners that you're on episode number 191, but I was on your episode 34 talking about destructive family patterns. And so it's been that long ago, however long that has been. But I have watched you and how you have really made such a huge difference for women who are in confusing and covert emotional and spiritual abuse, and they have no idea.
Yeah. It's such a big thing too. I think I used to say that 1 out of every 3 women in Christian environments were in a covert abusive relationship. I really think now it's close to half, maybe even more than half, because there's no statistics on it because covert abuse is so under the radar. It's so difficult to understand. People figure it out by talking to other people who've experienced it and can put words to it. By examining, I have like an emotional abuse quiz, by answering questions like, am I experiencing this in my marriage? And a lot of people on the outside will say, oh, that's no big deal. If you just take one little behavior, it's like, well, that's no big deal. And maybe a little behavior would be no big deal if it happened once in a great while. But with covert abuse, it's behaviors. I think Patrick Doyle's the one who called it death by a million cuts. It's behaviors that are small and tiny, but they are patterns of behaviors. They happen over and over and over again, and they never stop.
Well, here it is as we record this. It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So domestic violence, like overt abuse, where you can put your finger on it if he's hit you, or there's bruises, or kept you contained where you couldn't get out of a room, all of those things that we can put our finger on. But covert abuse is very different than that. And it can be so confusing. I want folks to see the cover of your book, Is It Me? And I think this came out, in 2019, was it? Sometime around there.
I don't even remember.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's out there. It's amazing. It's great. But on page 15 of the book, you do define, it says, my definition of hidden emotional domestic abuse is the secret, regular, and repeated cruel mistreatment of the inner emotions and heart of another person living within the same home.
Yeah. So they're targeting the emotions of another human being. They're using emotional manipulation maybe guilt manipulation or shaming another person in order to control that person and get that person to do what they want them to do. And it works really well on Christian women, especially who have a higher, they just have a guilt conscience that flares up very easily. They really want to follow God and do what's right and obey the Bible and make their husband happy. And so it's very easy for a Christian man, if he understands all of this, to use all of that against her to get her to discount her own perspectives and her own ideas and to feel a lot of shame and guilt.
And that's what we get, those kind of dynamics in other areas, don't we, Natalie? Not just in the marital relationship. So are they aware? Is a couple aware of this? Because we would like to think they're just doing it and they don't even know any better, or we don't know any better because this is what dad did from, this is how you've been groomed, so to speak, which is what I speak about how that family of origin and these patterns and the whole system, it's a bigger system than that couple.
Yes.
So speak to that.
I think these men, I think some of them are aware and doing it on purpose to be malicious, but I think a lot of them just do it because it works. You get married to someone and then you start noticing that if you want something, that all you have to do is say a little sideways jab, or maybe imply, be passive aggressive or make an implication, or, and the other person jumps to figure out what you're trying to say and fix it and make you feel better. And so these guys realize, hey, that works. I don't even know that they're consciously thinking, oh, this little abuse tactic works. They're not thinking that way. It's just human nature to do what's pragmatic and what works for us. If I want my way, and I know that if I say something to guilt manipulate my partner, then she'll give me my way, then I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, it stems from an inward attitude of entitlement that already exists in the abusive person. It's an inside thing. It's like they are like that. That's who they are as a human being. And so they're going to figure out, that's why people like this, they don't necessarily want to be with someone who is very well boundaried and says no. So in a dating relationship, this kind of an abusive person, if they meet someone who's like, no, I don't want to do that, or who's very confident about their own perspectives and opinions, the abuser is not going to be as attracted to that kind of individual because they're not manipulatable.
Well, speak to that, because, okay, we grew up as young women, and I know this probably goes both ways, but I'm thinking, Natalie, you're thinking it's mainly the man who is the abuser and the woman who is
it definitely goes both ways, because I know couples where the woman is the abusive one. So I'm well aware of that. All my work is with female victims. So I just make the assumption, especially if she's coming forward first, I'll make the assumption that she's telling the truth, and then I'll, work with her. But yeah, it does go both ways. You're right.
Yeah. Well, and how we are all groomed as well. So we grew up with these stories of Cinderella and Prince Charming and Sleeping Beauty, and a woman might look at a husband, or a potential spouse or whatever, these leadership skills. She's always wanted someone to be the leader. Yes. And then we have that built into our patriarchal church systems, don't we, where the man has to be the spiritual leader. Why don't you speak to that, because it's a two-way thing, right? To be drawn to this, where it might work for a while, maybe.
Yeah, well, it can. I mean, you've heard of complementarian thinking. That's the idea. It's the idea that men were created to be leaders, and they were naturally designed to be leaders, and women were created to be followers and natural design to play a certain role. And it's just very limited in its understanding of human nature and its understanding, I believe, of God. But it became very popular, and in some Christian circles, and it specifically grooms women and makes them believe that this is actually God's plan for them to not have boundaries, to not have perspective, or if they do have perspective, that it's definitely below someone's perspective who is a male person. So I think Christian women are especially susceptible to this kind of thinking. It is obviously, this is out there in culture at large. You know, I mean, throughout the history of the world, we've been very misogynistic.
Yeah.
You know, but I think even as culture is starting to come around, starting to have conversations about this, this is not correct. You think about the 1950s, the dad who goes to work and the mom stays home, which also is just, that was just for a time period. You know, that was not not the norm all throughout history. Actually, it was just a time period thing. But now it's like Christians today now think that those are the golden years, because that was when women were truly living out their God-given roles and men were truly living out their God. That's just a bunch of hogwash. If you look at all of history, that just doesn't even compute. But however, in all of history, you do see men and women, you do see misogyny, tons and tons of misogyny. And we're coming, like, would you want to live 100 years ago in the world as a woman, or would you rather live today? Obviously, we'd rather live today.
Definitely we've come along. I think the level of consciousness, we have this history and we see how all of this history has affected us today, but then to stay stuck in that way of thinking is very damaging, isn't it?
Yes,
because
it is. It is. And yet that's what I am seeing the church in general. Obviously, there's some good churches that are healthy out there, and they understand that men and women they're not, yes, we are different from each other, but we are also equal, and perspectives are equal, and we're equal before God. But there are many pockets of Christian religion out there, certain denominations and pockets. And that's where these women are starting. That's where the vast majority of the abuse is taking place. And it is as a direct result of the theology that they're teaching. So these are the women I see a huge movement right now of these women getting educated, first of all, because they've been isolated, really. They've been told what books to read. They've been told what pastors to listen to. They've been told these people are heretical, so don't listen to them. So this is what nations and countries do, and they're trying to, use propaganda to control the thinking of the people. And this is what the church is doing to control the thinking of women and keep them in a place of subservience and oppression, and keep them willingly there. Women are staying there willingly. They want to stay there because they've been brainwashed with this idea that this is what God wants. And if it's what God wants, then that's what I need to do. This is a lie from the devil. And now I really see it starting to turn around. I think there's a huge movement of people just rising up and saying, this is literally satanic, and we're not going to stand for it.
Yeah. And you know what? I want to back up a little bit too, because you have this remarkable understanding and passion, Natalie. I would love for my listeners to know where Natalie came from. You had how many children before coming to a point of, can you share some of your story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I grew up in a very conservative Christian home. We were immersed in the Bill Gothard movement. I used to go to his seminars in the 70s and 80s. I married a man who was a brand new Christian at the time, but I thought, and there were problems that I could see, but I thought it was my job to be the wind beneath his wings and to help him and just be his helpmate, and everything was gonna be great. I got involved in the homeschooling community. We had 9 children. We used the Bill Gothard curriculum for 4 years. I was heavily into Vision Forum. I'm throwing out names just so that, because people who are listening who identify with some of those things or they will know immediately what I'm talking about. Because there's cultures involved in those different names that I'm dropping. But and it wasn't until it wasn't until I started, my marriage was painful and confusing from the very get-go. 6 months into my marriage, I was like sick to my stomach because I realized I think I made a big mistake and there's no way out now, because
Wow.
I did not believe in divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just made the best of it. And I had 9 children and I love God I've always, since I was 7 years old, just passionate about my relationship with God. And, but eventually I tried to get help from the church in various ways at different times throughout our marriage. And then I finally started, actually, I found Leslie Vernick's book. Actually, what happened was I was pregnant with my last child, and he's now going to be 11 this next March. But so it was almost 11 years ago, and I wanted to kill myself. And
Wow.
I mean, I thought I went to a hotel and my body was literally racked in sobs all night long. And I thought, if I just go in the bathroom
Mm.
and run the bathwater, but he was due to be
Oh,
born like in
wow.
about 3 weeks. And
Wow.
I thought, I can't kill my baby.
Oh,
So the next morning I took my laptop and I went to a coffee shop and I started Googling things like passive aggressive. I didn't know about emotional abuse. I'd never heard that term before. So I
wow.
was Googling, I'd had heard what passive aggressive was, but I wasn't sure quite what it was. So I started Googling things and I found, I think I found Townsend and what's that guy's name?
Cloud and Townsend, Henry
Yeah.
Cloud and yeah, John
Yes.
Townsend.
I found their book called Who's Pushing Your Buttons?
Mm.
And it basically was about emotional abuse without using that terminology.
Wow.
But after that, and I was underlining, I mean, that whole book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. Like what I've been experiencing, it is a thing. And there is language for this.
Wow.
And then about a year and a half later, I found Leslie Vernick had just published her book, The Emotionally Abusive Marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I read that and I immediately hired her to coach me.
Wow.
So while she was coaching me for a year, I had an in-home separation from my husband at the time. And after that, and people who know Leslie, she really tries to empower women to be able to make their own decisions, but also a lot of Christian women want to stay. They don't want to get divorced. So
Mm-hmm.
she kind of leans towards that a little bit. And I really did want to stay. I
Mm-hmm.
really did not want to break up my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was perfect for me at the time. But eventually I did have my husband leave the home and we were separated for almost 2 years. And then during that time, I realized he's not going to change. And I can't do this anymore. It's either me kill myself or get a divorce. And I decided that God wanted me to just get a divorce and not kill myself. So
oh my goodness. Well, also Leslie was one of my previous podcast guests. I can't remember what episode it is, but for those that are listening, go back and listen as well. So that is amazing because honestly, the books you mentioned, I did read Boundaries in Marriage, Cloud and Townsend's Boundaries in Marriage. That was an eye opener for me too at that time. And then also Leslie's books. It was like, those were ahas.
Yes.
So that is amazing. And I'm trying to picture the younger, 10 years ago, Natalie here. How many kids did you have at home at that point? And you had a newborn also?
Yeah. So only one child was out. My oldest child was out of the house by that time because he was still in the house too. So my husband moved out when he got married. So actually, when my baby was born, he was still in the house. So I had 9 kids in the house at the time. And
wow.
I was still homeschooling then. I did eventually put my kids in a variety of different places depending on what they needed. But, and then my youngest ended up having autism. So while I was getting out during the next 5 years of my life, really, it was pretty much a nightmare just trying to get out and learning new things. But that was when I started getting bound. That's when I started implementing boundaries. I started seeing that I was a worthwhile person. Whereas before my feelings of worthiness were rock bottom. I really thought that I was just a piece of refuse on the ground. And a lot of Christian teaching kind of, I do not believe Jesus teaches this, but Christian teaching, kind of makes the problem worse because they tell you you're such a dirty, rotten little worm, and God can't even look at you because of how gross you are. And I really had internalized that and bought into that to the extreme, I think, and thought that was humility. I believed that was humility. But when you think about it, how are we ever making an impact on the world when we are shut down and curled up in the fetal position on our bathroom floor, just trying to survive the next day? I really don't think that's what Jesus Christ came to offer us. I
believe he came to
set
offer
us free from that.
Yeah, a life and an abundant life. But yes, I hear what you're saying. I'm so curious too, because you've got kids at all ages, and then this transformation going on with their mom. How did that even affect that, your kids?
Yeah.
I think I heard recently it's your daughter that's kind of actually helping you in business, which I'm thinking, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because when you're in that relationship and you're trying to make it work, you create a sort of pseudo stability because you're dancing along with your partner and you're doing your part to keep him to keep him happy, to keep the equilibrium in the relationship. When you start standing up for yourself and setting boundaries and saying, yes, I will do this, but no, I won't do that. Or my perspective is different from yours. And then you start experiencing that kickback. Now, all of a sudden we've created an unstable situation. And yes, the whole family feels it. And I didn't at the time have a lot of mind management skills to manage my mind around that, which I do now, and which I help women. I actually help women with that. And so I was experiencing symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which are very similar to borderline personality disorder symptoms.
Wow.
Where you get hysterical and you start feeling like you're going crazy. You start communicating in ways that are very desperate and loud and out of control. And so I was doing that in that unstable place, which was also just very important for me to go through that phase in order to get help then for myself.
Yeah.
And once the relationship was done and I was out and he was out of the house, my daughter will tell you, mom started to settle. I was able to have the emotional capacity to now go back to what I was doing before and help my children and hold space for their emotions. Right. But there was that I tell people, when you're trying to get out of a relationship, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So a lot of people will go, oh, everything's getting worse. I must be making the wrong choice. No. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to destabilize the whole thing. The house of cards, I talk about this in my book, the house of cards has to fall before you can rebuild it. This is what sets my book apart, I think, because there's a lot of books out there about emotional abuse, but I talk specifically about the fallout, the religious fallout that happens, because also my church excommunicated me as well. So when you're in environments of abuse, then the whole thing collapses. And that is you need to be validated and supported through that, because it is traumatic with a capital T. You're losing everything. And you're also a mother. So you need to be able to help your children with what they're trying to process, the fact that mom and dad are separated and they might get a divorce, and and their whole lives are falling apart while you're trying to figure out who in the world you are and what in the world you're doing and what your future is going to look like. And it's just pure terror and pure chaos for a while. But that's why, so in my program, we help women walk through that chaos. We walk through it with them so that they have the support that they need and the tools that they need to get through it in a way that's much more healthy than so I want to help women not to have to go. It's going to fall apart, but hopefully it won't. Hopefully they won't feel alone in it like I did for so many years.
I mean, that is amazing that you paved the way, Natalie. and it took this much, I mean, it took such courage for you to do what you did. Great that you hired Leslie as a coach,
Yes.
but what you're offering now, I mean, the sisterhood, maybe you can speak to that, because this does take a tremendous amount of courage to do. And there's all kinds of moving parts and different stages of life, I'm sure, that you're helping women with, but you've got a community of people. Here's a quick pause for an important message. When it comes to workplace and personal relationships, many of these episodes give us insights into people skills, strategies, and creating a healthy work culture. As a speaker and retreat facilitator, I also support organizations and companies. Go to my media page, judyspeaker.com, to find out how I can help. And you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Judy K. Herman. And now, back to our conversation.
Yes. So it's called the Flying Free program, or the Flying Free, the sisterhood, I guess. We like to call ourselves butterflies, but we're, so in my program, I have courses and things you can take. I do coaching every week, live coaching. So we'll coach, it's group coaching. So everyone gets to hear other people get coached. It's the same. It's very similar. Everyone's got the same, we're all going through the same things.
Yeah.
So it's very applicable. And, it's convenient because we put everything on a private podcast. So theoretically, you don't even have to log into the membership site. You just get that private podcast on your podcast app. And then you can just open it up. And when there's a new update, you just go in and you can listen to it on the go, when you're doing laundry or dishes or getting ready for the day. So it doesn't necessarily have to cut into, because these women they're under so much pressure, and as far as just what's emotional pressure and emotional burden, they don't necessarily need another, like, to log into another site and try to do a course or whatever. So we try to make it as easy. Now there are courses and things that they can do to dig in further, but I try to make it as easy as possible for them. And then,
because you know what that's like, don't you? You know what that's like
to not have time or capacity, and also the brain fog. You're not really, it's very difficult to think clearly when you're in that kind of chaos. It's, so I remember I needed to hear things over and over and over again just to get them, because they were such new ideas and concepts that I had never heard before. My brain was so programmed a certain way, with a certain way of thinking, that it took a long time for me to help my brain open up and hear new ideas and new thoughts. And those things changed my life.
Wow.
Once I was able to hear them and reprogram my brain in a different direction.
Wow.
So, and we do have a private forum also where they interact with each other and get to know each other. And we just had our very first butterfly boot camp last week in Minnesota. And there were over 100 women that came here in person, and we got to hug each other and had some sessions and did a lot of really fun things together. And it was amazing. So, and there are people like I know there's one group in California who gets together on a regular basis. Here in Minnesota, we have a group that gets together in person, but for the most part, these women are kind of alone, in their houses, and they just need connection. That's the other thing too. If they go to their church and say something, they're going to get told, "Oh my goodness, you're airing your husband's dirty laundry, and you're being so disrespectful, and you're being rebellious," and they're going to get shut down and shamed. So it's very scary to feel like you don't have anyone who understands or knows what you're going through.
Wow. That is amazing. It's beautiful that you're offering this, Natalie, because I know community makes all the difference in the world. I want to go back to what you said, like listening to things over and over again, like the repetition, because you've been so programmed otherwise. And then these new ideas, you think it, because there really is two ways to change the brain, the structure of the brain. One is trauma, and the other is repetition, but trauma does change the structure. So learning to think a new way, like listening to the same podcast or episode over and over and over again, is a good thing. You have to retrain those neural pathways of the brain.
Yes. And I think speaking of podcasts, listening to lots of different podcasts that are saying similar things,
Yes.
also very helpful. Just to know this is not just one person that's saying this.
Right.
There's a whole body of knowledge out there that other people that we can expose ourselves to. And I love going down rabbit trails because I'll find someone on someone else's podcast that will lead me to something else, that will lead me to something else. And I view all of it as the Holy Spirit guiding me. God, I just believe that God is conspiring in our favor, that he wants
Yes.
lead us along if we are willing to be brave and go to places that are unusual or that we have never gone before. But sometimes we're scared, especially Christian women are very scared to branch out of their particular denomination or their particular way of thinking. And honestly, we will never grow or change if we are not willing to be wrong about things. Always. We have to always go through life and be willing to be wrong about things. That's how we learn new things.
And the thing is, it's how our brains are structured, aren't they? Is like this neuroplasticity. Like we're designed to grow up and also develop those new neural pathways to challenge those old beliefs that are no longer serving us or not even true anymore, but we take them as gospel truth. But then then we like, oh, well, the enemy might be invading our minds or whatever. We've been so programmed on so many levels. And when you get outside of that, I think, it's like when you see something, you can't unsee it.
Yes.
And it's wonderful because you're there and there's a bunch of others there with this same message. You have a particular niche in working with Christian women. Are most all of your women Christian? Do you deal with others that are non-Christian or of other faiths, let's say?
Yeah. I mean, most of them are of some version of the Christian faith. So but we have in the past we've had a Jewish person in the past. We've had a Muslim person in the past. And I don't know how many are of different faiths, that have not disclosed what their faith is, but it doesn't matter what the faith is. If your faith is keeping you, if your faith has been part of what's hooked you into an abusive mindset, then that's what I love to help women with. Because here's the thing, I love God and I believe God is for women. And I want to see women and their faith in God grow deeper and stronger and more profound.
Yes.
And I want them to lean into the love of God. I think that's what it eventually will set them free. But their faith and how their faith has abused them has put up a gargantuan thick wall between them and God. And that wall needs to be torn down. So abuse prevents them from getting to know who they are, who God created them to be. And religious abuse prevents them from getting to know who God is. And we want to tear down all those walls so that they can find health and hope and healing in themselves and with God.
Wow. Well, the fact that you are focusing on Christian women that are in confusing or, disturbing and destructive marriages, it does give you that credibility because so many from, very conservative Christian or, evangelical Christian, they're not going to trust others. So you have a message that is certainly universal. Let me ask you, I'm curious, Natalie, on a couple levels here. Do you find a certain demographic of woman that is experienced the covert and spiritual abuse? Because are they women more in traditional marriages, or are some of them like career women that do have maybe their own identity in the workforce? Is there any differences there?
I'm seeing it all across the board. I think I shouldn't say the vast majority, but probably the majority of the women happen to be coming out of the homeschool, really conservative, patriarchal kind of Christian movements. And so, in those movements, like I grew up believing that it was wrong for example, for a mom to have a job outside of the home.
Mm.
So of course, do you see how that teaching, then of
Mhm.
course, those people coming out of that teaching, they're going to mostly be stay-at-home moms. However, interestingly enough, we have a lot of therapists and teachers and people helper types
Uh-huh.
that are in my program.
Yeah.
And they are powerful human beings
Mhm.
that do not but they love people and they care about people, and that hooks them and makes them more susceptible to being manipulated by people.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that's true.
they're
We got this built-in
yes.
little helper.
Yes. I
Um,
think those people though are very easy to, once the light bulb goes on with them, they make those connections, they're able to heal pretty quickly because they've got a lot of tools in their toolbox already.
uh-huh.
They just need to see how it applies to them and how maybe they're letting their boundaries down or not valuing themselves as much. I feel like they get it much more quickly, and their turnaround of healing um is much more quick. And the great thing about them that I love is that they're turning around then and taking their healing to so many people because of the kind
Yes.
of job they have.
Yes.
So, but I will one other thing I want to say though is moms who get the healing, they're taking their healing to their kids. They're
Yes.
making a difference. I hear a lot of testimonies of how, this transformation happened inside of me, changed the way I'm parenting. And wow, my kids have a leg up on life because of the tools because I learned these tools, able to pass them on to my kids. And now they're much further along than I was when I was, 16, 17 years old.
They are changing their branch of the family tree, aren't they? I
Exactly.
mean, it's
Exactly.
huge. It's huge. It's a lot of work because thinking of generations of patterns that have affected your neural pathways, and to
Yep.
break through that, it's very courageous and remarkable work.
It is.
And that's why I've sent you some of my clients, Natalie, and it's been such a great supplement for their therapy and really moving forward and giving them courage, because there is so
Yes.
much an individual therapist can help a woman with, but when you've got a community and you've got this teaching and you've got this podcast in your ear and you've got others here, it really does, it takes a lot to
Yep.
change that and to have the courage.
Yep. It does. It has to be. There are many women that come in and they say, in fact, I just posted this, I think on Twitter. Many people come in and say, my therapist recommended this program, or this book. My counselor recommended this book or this program. And it's together, working in conjunction together with getting individual therapy for your own personal problems,
Mm-hmm.
as well as hearing the truth and understanding that this is a global issue and
Mm-hmm.
what you're experiencing is a thing on a global scale. And even on a smaller scale in the Christian world, in the religious world, is important. All of those pieces come together to help give a person the very best chances of healing and moving forward and becoming really I believe a world changer, because I believe in the butterfly effect because when you change your life, you change the world.
I
You do.
love
It's
that.
the butterfly effect.
And that's
Yeah.
where the Flying Free logo comes from.
Yes. Yes.
That's beautiful. How has this work changed you, Natalie?
Well, I've definitely gone from things I think that that God, when I was born, gave me and intended to be my personality and my strengths, were taken and really just suppressed through oppression. And I feel like he cracked open I feel like God cracked open that egg just to let me be able to, or if we want to go back to the butterfly analogy, I had to go from being that caterpillar, and then that chrysalis place is
Yeah.
the caterpillar actually turns into goo. Like it becomes shapeless and formless. It's just jelly in
Huh.
there. And you had to go through that. That's kind of like the dark night of the soul. That's where all the chaos is and the pain and you don't know what your future is going to hold, but you have to go through that. That's where God does that transforming work. And I feel like I'm finally flying. I feel like I've been a caterpillar my whole life and wanted. Another way of looking at it is looking to all of my mommies and daddies for direction and for help, and basically staying in a child role,
Wow.
and then finally growing up. I feel for the first time in my life, in my 50s, that I am an adult, that God speaks to me directly. He doesn't speak to me through a pastor or through the worship leader or through, he speaks to me directly.
Yes.
I can make adult decisions. I can have confidence and certainty in my choices and my decisions. And also I'm free to make mistakes and be okay with it. There's no shame in making mistakes. There's no shame in trying things and failing. That's how we learn and grow and develop. And it's this big, beautiful thing. And I have never been, there's still stuff in my life. I still have kids at home. My kids are, it's life. None of us life is going to be a 50-50, 50% of the time, amazing, miraculous, 50% of the time, it's going to pretty much suck. Right. But I feel like I'm finally in flow and living the life that God actually prepared for me to live. And I just want to say one more thing too. You think when you are in an abusive relationship that your life is wasted. Or even if you get out, you look back and it's so easy to go, what a waste. I could have been spending those years, that's also a lie. None of it is a waste. All of that is, I like to think of it as like a trampoline. It's the trampoline that you jump on and then it launches you like a rocket into your future. Without that trampoline launching pad, you wouldn't have the future that's in store for you. And I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you're in your 70s or 80s. You have a future. I believe that we are eternal beings, and you have a future here on earth. You are still a world changer in your 80s, even in your 90s. My grandmother lived to be in her 90s. My great grandmother lived to be 104. We are world changers no matter what stage we're at.
Wow.
And what our past is all part of the big, beautiful package of who God created us to be and how he wants us to change the world.
Hold on. I'm going to have my fella edit this out. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You can be a world changer in whatever. And it's kind of like my story. I know my story is different than yours, but there's some similarities, as I said before. But here I am, a relationship therapist. I've been trying to figure out relationships all of my life, Natalie. And I have now 40 years of marital experiences to two separate husbands, not at the same time. But at this point, it's the stories that you tell yourself, aren't they? Or that you tell. What is the story about that? And my story is that it took those two husbands to get me to where I am today, like learning who I really am. And I identify with you on flying free, living in that flow of life. No, it's not perfect. We're all having a human journey. We all go through human struggles, but that's the way it's supposed to be.
Exactly.
But I love your encouragement, because no matter what age you are, you can live your most beautiful, vibrantly authentic, and abundant life. I believe that.
That's right.
And it's not a waste. So I think this valuable, valuable message, Natalie. How can folks first of all, is there any final words that you have? Because I want to know how folks can get in touch.
Nope, I don't think so.
You did great. I love it. We could go on and on. I would absolutely love another hour of your time, but this would be way too long. How can folks get in touch with you?
Well, my website is flyingfreenow.com, and you can get on my mailing list. There'll be a little pop-up, and I'll send you the first chapter of my book for free and the first chapter of the companion workbook. And then once you're on my mailing list, I'll kind of nurture you a little bit. We'll hold hands for a little while. And my podcast is it's just called the Flying Free Podcast. And you can find that on any, podcast app, unless it's some obscure one. I don't I guess I think there's like hundreds of them now,
Oh,
but
I
like
had no
Apple
idea.
Podcasts or, Google Podcasts or Spotify, those I have. So the Flying Free podcast is another place where you can find me. Those two places are the main. I'm on all of the different social medias things. I just started TikTok. So, but I
good
feel like
for
a lot
you.
of
I tell you
conservative
what.
Christians aren't over there. So
Excuse me. But anyway, I want folks to see the cover of your book again. Is It Me? And yes, Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage, A Christian Woman's Guide to Hidden and Emotional and Spiritual Abuse. It's like, yes, get the free chapter, but get the book too, because
Yeah.
it's going to really make a difference. And so you've been so instrumental in my life on so many levels, Natalie. And I couldn't count how many clients and how many times I've mentioned you need to listen to Flying Free podcast.
Oh,
Listen to
thank
this,
you.
listen to this. And so you've been a great resource. So any therapists that are there that need you, you're there. And I so appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for letting me share your podcast audience with you. It's been a
Yes, because
pleasure.
it's all about better relationships and a better life, isn't it? And thanks so
Yes.
much for being my guest.
Thank you.
Wow, I felt the intensity of Natalie's story, and you may have too. And I want you to know that you're not alone. Do reach out by filling out the form on the website, betterrelationshipsbetterlife.com, or by contacting Natalie through her website, flyingfreenow.com. There's plenty of support and hope. In the meantime, please share, subscribe, rate, and comment in the streaming platform of your choice. See you next time on Better Relationships, Better Life.